Hello everybody, I am the Linkzilla, and welcome back to Minecraft Jurassic Park. Sorry to inform you guys what little fans that I might have, but I don't think I'll be doing Jurassic Park radio for the upcoming future. Basically speaking, I mostly wanted to do the live streams just to pretty much take the pressure off of me and my editor of having to edit these videos together and put them on YouTube, when in reality, all I really want to do is just play Minecraft, get to building things again, and finally get finished on this section of fence. And, well, basically speaking, I don't really feel like doing commentary on it. I just kind of want to, well, listen to the Jurassic Park audiobook. So, you guys are interested in that, you're free to listen along with me, but I'll probably also have the Jurassic Park movies going on in the background anyway, because, well, that's just how much I love this franchise. So, bottom line is, I'm just sick of YouTube shit right now. It seems like every single thing that I did to try and make sure that the stream was optimal for viewing just failed. Like, the stream health just always ended up failing, no matter what settings I tried to set it to. So, I think that we're just going to be done with live streaming on YouTube for now. So, let's just finally get back into playing Minecraft and finishing this fence. I hope you guys enjoy the Jurassic Park audiobook that I have it queued up right now. We're at the chapter Skeleton.
That's fantastic, Ellie said. How young? Young, Grant said. 2, maybe 4 months at most. And it's definitely a velociraptor? Definitely, Grant said. Maybe our luck has finally turned. For the last 2 years at Snakewater, the team had excavated only duck-billed hadrosaurs. They already had evidence for vast herds of these grazing dinosaurs roaming the Cretaceous plains in groups of 10 or 20,000, as buffalo would later roam, but increasingly the question that faced them was, where were the predators? They expected predators to be rare, of course. Studies of predator-stroke-prey populations in the game parks of Africa and India suggested that, roughly speaking, there was 1 predatory carnivore for every 400 herbivores. That meant a herd of 10,000 duckbills would support only 25 tyrannosaurs. So it was unlikely that they would find the remains of a large predator. But where were the smaller predators? Snakewater had dozens of nesting sites. In some places, the ground was literally covered with fragments of dinosaur eggshells, and many small dinosaurs ate eggs. Animals like Dromaeosaurus, Oviraptor, Velociraptor, and Silurus, predators 3 to 6 feet tall, must have been found here in abundance. But they had discovered none so far. Perhaps this Velociraptor skeleton did mean their luck had changed, and an infant. Ellie knew that one of Grant's dreams was to study infant-rearing behavior in carnivorous dinosaurs, as he had already studied the behavior of herbivores. Perhaps this was the first step toward that dream. "You must be pretty excited," Ellie said. Grant didn't answer. "I said you must be excited," Ellie repeated. "My God," Grant said. He was staring at the facts. Ellie looked over Grant's shoulder at the X-ray and breathed out slowly. "You think it's an Amazicus?" "Yes," Grant said. "Or a Triassicus. The skeleton is so light." "But it's no lizard," she said. "No," Grant said. "This is not a lizard. No 3-toed lizard has walked on this planet for 200 million years." Ellie's first thought was that she was looking at a hoax. An ingenious, skillful hoax, but a hoax nonetheless. Every biologist knew that the threat of a hoax was omnipresent. The most famous hoax, the Piltdown Man, had gone undetected for 40 years, and its perpetrator was still unknown. More recently, the distinguished astronomer Fred Hoyle had claimed that a fossil-winged dinosaur, Archaeopteryx, on display in the British Museum was a fraud. It was later shown to be genuine. The essence of a successful hoax was that it presented scientists with what they expected to see. And to Ellie's eye, the X-ray image of the lizard was exactly correct. The 3-toed foot was well-balanced, with a medial claw smallest. The bony remnants of the 4th and 5th toes were located up near the metatarsal joint. The tibia was strong and considerably longer than the femur. At the hip, the acetabulum was complete. The tail showed 45 vertebrae. It was a young Procompsognathus. Could this X-ray be faked? I don't know, Grant said, but it's almost impossible to fake an X-ray. And Procompsognathus is an obscure animal. Even people familiar with dinosaurs have never heard of it. Ellie read the note. Specimen acquired on the beach of Cabo Blanco, July 16th. Apparently a howler monkey was eating the animal, and this was all that was recovered. Oh, and it says the lizard attacked a little girl. I doubt that, Grant said. But perhaps Procompsognathus was so small and light we assume it must be a scavenger, only feeding off dead creatures. And you can tell the size, he measured quickly. It's about 20 centimeters to the hips, which means the full animal would be about a foot tall, about as big as a chicken. Even a child would look pretty fearsome to it. It might bite an infant, but not a child. Ellie frowned at the X-ray image. Do you think this could really be a legitimate rediscovery, she said? Like the coelacanth? Maybe, Grant said. 20 centimeters to the hips, which means the full animal would be about a foot tall, about as big as a chicken. Even a child would look pretty fearsome to it. It might bite an infant, but not a child. Ellie frowned at the X-ray image. Do you think this could really be a legitimate rediscovery, she said? Like the coelacanth? Maybe, Grant said. The coelacanth was a 5-foot-long fish, thought to have died out 65 million years ago, until a specimen was pulled from the ocean in 1938. But there were other examples. The Australian mountain pygmy possum was known only from fossils until a live one was found in a garbage can in Melbourne. And a 10,000-year-old fossil fruit bat from New Guinea was described by a zoologist who not long afterward received a living specimen in the mail. But could it be real? She persisted. What about the age? Grant nodded. The age is a problem. Most rediscovered animals were rather recent additions to the fossil record, 10 or 20,000 years old. Some were a few million years old. In the case of the coelacanth, 65 million years old. But the specimen they were looking at was much, much older than that. Dinosaurs had died out in the Cretaceous period 65 million years ago. They had flourished as the dominant life form on the planet in the Jurassic 190 million years ago, and they had first appeared in the Triassic, roughly 220 million years ago. It was during the early Triassic period that Procompsognathus had lived, a time so distant that our planet didn't even look the same. All the continents were joined together in a single landmass called Pangaea, which extended from the north to the South Pole, a vast continent of ferns and forests with a few large deserts. The Atlantic Ocean was a narrow lake between what would become Africa and Florida. The air was denser, the land was warmer, there were hundreds of active volcanoes, and it was in this environment that Procompsognathus lived. Well, Ellie said, we know animals have survived. Crocodiles are basically Triassic animals living in the present. Sharks are Triassic, so we know it has happened before. Grant nodded. And the thing is, he said, how else do we explain it? It's either a fake, which I doubt, or else it's a rediscovery. What else could it be? The phone rang. Alice Leven again, Grant said. Let's see if she'll send us the actual specimen. He answered it and looked at Ellie, surprised. Yes, I'll hold for Mr. Hammond. Yes, of course. Hammond? What does he want? Ellie said. Grant shook his head and then said into the phone, Yes, Mr. Hammond, yes, it's good to hear your voice, too. Yes. He looked at Ellie. Oh, you did? Oh, yes? Is that right? He cupped his hand over the mouthpiece and said, Still eccentric as ever. You've got to hear this. Grant pushed the speaker button, and Ellie heard a raspy old man's voice speaking rapidly. Hell of an annoyance from some EPA fellow. Seems to have gone off half-cocked, all on his own, running around the country talking to people, stirring up things. I don't suppose anybody's come to see you way out there. As a matter of fact, Grant said, somebody did come to see me. Hammond snorted. I was afraid of that smart-ass kid named Morris. Yes, his name was Morris, Grant said. He's going to see all our consultants, Hammond said. He went to see Ian Malcolm the other day, you know, the mathematician in Texas. That's the first I knew of it. We're having one hell of a time getting a handle on this thing. It's typical of the way government operates. There isn't any complaint, there isn't any charge, just harassment from some kid who's unsupervised and is running around at the taxpayer's expense. Did he bother you? Disrupt your work? No, he didn't bother me. Well, that's too bad in a way, Hammond said, because I'd try and get an injunction to stop him if he had. As it is, I had our lawyers call over at EPA to find out what the hell their problem is. The head of the office claims he didn't know there was any investigation. You figure that one out. Damn bureaucracy is all it is. Hell, I think this kid's trying to get down to Costa Rica, poke around, get onto our island. You know we have an island down there? No, Grant said, looking at Ellie. I didn't know. Oh, yes, we bought it and started our operation, 4 or 5 years ago now. I forget exactly. Called Isla Nublar. Big island, 100 miles offshore. Going to be a biological preserve. Wonderful place, tropical jungle. You know, you ought to see it, Dr. Grant. Sounds interesting, Grant said, but actually, it's almost finished now, you know, Hammond said. I've sent you some material about it. Did you get my material? No, but we're pretty far from... Maybe it'll come today. Look it over. The island's just beautiful. It's got everything. We've been in construction now 30 months. You can imagine. Big park. Opens in September next year. You really ought to go see it. It sounds wonderful, but as a matter of fact, Hammond said, I'm going to insist you see it, Dr. Grant. I know you'd find it right up your alley. You'd find it fascinating. I'm in the middle of... Grant said. Say, I'll tell you what, Hammond said, as if the idea had just occurred to him. I'm having some of the people who consulted for us go down there this weekend, spend a few days and look it over, at our expense, of course. It'd be terrific if you'd give us your opinion. I couldn't possibly, Grant said. Oh, just for a weekend, Hammond said, with the irritating, cheery persistence of an old man. That's all I'm talking about, Dr. Grant. I wouldn't want to interrupt your work. I know how important that work is. Believe me, I know that. Never interrupt your work. But you could hop on down there this weekend and be back on Monday. No, I couldn't, Grant said. I just found a new skeleton, and... Yes, fine, but I still think you should come, Hammond said, not really listening. And we've just received some evidence for a very puzzling and remarkable find, which seems to be a living procompsognathed. Oh, what? Hammond said, slowing down. I didn't quite get that. You said a living procompsognathed? That's right, Grant said. It's a biological specimen, a partial fragment of an animal collected from Central America, a living animal. You don't say, Hammond said. A living animal. How extraordinary. Yes, Grant said, we think so too. So, you see, this isn't the time for me to be leaving Central America, did you say? Yes. Where in Central America is it from, do you know? A beach called Cabo Blanco. I don't know exactly where. I see. Hammond cleared his throat. And when did this, specimen arrive in your hands? Just today. Today? I see. Today. I see. Yes. Hammond cleared his throat again. Grant looked at Ellie and mouthed, What's going on? Ellie shook her head. Sounds upset. Grant mouthed, See if Morris is still here. She went to the window and looked out, but Morris's car was gone. She turned back. On the speaker, Hammond coughed. Dr. Grant, have you told anybody about it yet? No. Good. That's good. Well, yes. I'll tell you frankly, Dr. Grant, I'm having a little problem about this island. This EPA thing is coming at just the wrong time. How's that? Grant said. Well, we've had our problems and some delays. Let's just say that I'm under a little pressure here, and I'd like you to look at this island for me. Give me your opinion. I'll be paying you the usual weekend consultant rate of $20,000 a day. That'll be $60,000 for 3 days. And if you can spare Dr. Sattler, she'll go at the same rate. We need a botanist. What do you say? Ellie looked at Grant as he said, Well, Mr. Hammond, that much money would fully finance our expeditions for the next 2 summers. Good, Hammond said blandly. He seemed distracted now, his thoughts elsewhere. "I want this to be easy. Now, I'm sending the corporate jet to pick you up at that private airfield east of Choto. You know the one I mean? It's only about 2 hours' drive from where you are. You be there at 5 p.m. tomorrow, and I'll be waiting for you. Take you right down. Can you and Dr. Sattler make that plane?" "I guess we can." "Good. Pack lightly. You don't need passports. I'm looking forward to it. See you tomorrow," Hammond said, and he hung up. Cowan, Swain, and Ross. Midday sun streamed into the San Francisco law offices of Cowan, Swain, and Ross, giving the room a cheerfulness that Donald Gennaro did not feel. He listened on the phone and looked at his boss, Daniel Ross, cold as an undertaker in his dark pinstripe suit. "I understand, John," Gennaro said. "And Grant agreed to come?" Good. Yes, that sounds fine to me. My congratulations, John." He hung up the phone and turned to Ross. "We can't trust Hammond anymore. He's under too much pressure. The EPA's investigating him, is behind schedule on his Costa Rican resort, and the investors are getting nervous. There have been too many rumors of problems down there. Too many workmen have died. And now this business about a living Procomsit whatever on the mainland." "What does that mean?" Ross said. "Maybe nothing," Gennaro said. "But Hamachi is one of our principal investors. I got a report last week from Hamachi's representative in San Jose, the capital of Costa Rica. According to the report, some new kind of lizard is biting children on the coast." Ross blinked. "New lizard?" "Yes," Gennaro said. "We can't screw around with this. We've got to inspect that island right away. I've asked Hammond to arrange independent site inspections every week for the next 3 weeks. "And what does Hammond say?" "He insists nothing is wrong on the island, claims he has all these security precautions." "But you don't believe him," Ross said. "No," Gennaro said, "I don't." Donald Gennaro had come to Cowan Swain from a background in investment banking. Cowan Swain's high-tech clients frequently needed capitalization, and Gennaro helped them find the money. One of his first assignments back in 1982 had been to accompany John Hammond while the old man, then nearly 70, put together the funding to start the InGen Corporation. They eventually raised almost $1 billion, and Gennaro remembered it as a wild ride. "Hammond's a dreamer," Gennaro said. "A potentially dangerous dreamer," Ross said. "We should never have gotten involved. What is our financial position?" "The firm," Gennaro said, "owns 5%. General or limited?" "General." Ross shook his head. "We should never have done that." "It seemed wise at the time," Gennaro said. "Hell, it was 8 years ago. We took it in lieu of some fees. And if you remember, Hammond's plan was extremely speculative. He was really pushing the envelope. Nobody really thought he could pull it off." "But apparently he has," Ross said. "In any case, I agree that an inspection is overdue. What about your site experts?" "I'm starting with experts Hammond already hired as consultants early in the project." Gennaro tossed a list onto Ross's desk. "First group is a paleontologist, a paleobotanist, and a mathematician. They go down this weekend. I'll go with them." "Will they tell you the truth?" Ross said. "I think so. None of them had much to do with the island, and one of them, the mathematician, Ian Malcolm, was openly hostile to the project from the start. Insisted it would never work, could never work." "And who else?" "Just a technical person, a computer system analyst. Review the park's computers and fix some bugs. He should be there by Friday morning." "Fine," Ross said. "You are making the arrangements?" "Hammond asked to place the calls himself. I think he wants to pretend that he's not in trouble, that it's just a social invitation, showing off his island." "All right," Ross said, "but just make sure it happens. Stay on top of it. I want this Costa Rican situation resolved within a week." Ross got up and walked out of the room. Gennaro dialed, heard the whining hiss of a radio phone. Then he heard a voice say, "Grant here." "Hi, Dr. Grant, this is Donald Gennaro. I'm the general counsel for InGen. We talked a few years back. I don't know if you remember." "I remember," Grant said. "Well," Gennaro said, I just got off the phone with John Hammond, who tells me the good news that you're coming down to our island in Costa Rica. Yes, Grant said. I guess we're going down there tomorrow. Well, I just want to extend my thanks to you for doing this on short notice. Everybody at InGen appreciates it. We've asked Ian Malcolm, who, like you, was one of the early consultants, to come down as well. He's the mathematician at UT in Austin. John Hammond mentioned that, Grant said. Well, good, Gennaro said. And I'll be coming too, as a matter of fact. By the way, this specimen you have found of a what is it? Procomsognathus, Grant said. Yes, do you have the specimen with you, Dr. Grant, the actual specimen? No, Grant said. I've only seen an X-ray. The specimen is in New York. A woman from Columbia University called me. Well, I wonder if you could give me the details on that, Gennaro said. Then I can run down that specimen for Mr. Hammond, who's very excited about it. I'm sure you want to see the actual specimen, too. Perhaps I can even get it delivered to the island while you're all down there, Gennaro said. Grant gave him the information. Well, that's fine, Dr. Grant, Gennaro said. My regards to Dr. Sattler. I look forward to meeting you and him tomorrow. And Gennaro hung up. Plans. This just came, Ellie said the next day, walking to the back of the trailer with a thick manila envelope. One of the kids brought it back from town. It's from Hammond. Grant noticed the blue and white InGen logo as he tore open the envelope. Inside there was no cover letter, just a bound stack of paper. Pulling it out, he discovered it was blueprints. They were reduced, forming a thick book. The cover was marked Isla Nublar, Resort Guest Facilities, Full Set Safari Lodge. What the hell is this? He said. As he flipped open the book, a sheet of paper fell out. Dear Alan and Ellie, as you can imagine, we don't have much in the way of formal promotional materials yet, but this should give you some idea of the Isla Nublar project. I think it's very exciting. Looking forward to discussing this with you. Hope you can join us. Regards, John. I don't get it, Grant said. He flipped through the sheets. These are architectural plans. He turned to the top sheet. Visitor Center Stroke Lodge, Isla Nublar Resort. Client, InGen Incorporated, Palo Alto, California. Architects, Dunning, Murphy & Associates, New York. Richard Murphy, design partner. Theodore Chen, senior designer. Sheldon James, administrative partner. Engineers, Harlow, Whitney & Fields, Boston, structural. A.T. Mishikawa, Osaka, mechanical. Landscaping, Shepperton Rogers, London. A. Ashikiga, H. Ayasu, Kanazawa. Electrical, N.V. Kobayashi, Tokyo. A.R. Makasawa, senior consultant. Computer C/C, Integrated Computer Systems Incorporated, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Dennis Nedry, project supervisor. Grant turned to the plans themselves. They were stamped Industrial Secrets, Do Not Copy, and Confidential Work Product, Not for Distribution. Each sheet was numbered, and at the top, these plans represent the confidential creations of InGen Incorporated. You must have signed document 112/4A, or you risk prosecution. Looks pretty paranoid to me, he said. Maybe there's a reason, Ellie said. The next page was a topographical map. It showed Isla Nublar as an inverted teardrop, bulging at the north, tapering at the south. The island was 8 miles long, and the map divided it into several large sections. The northern section was marked Visitor Area, and it contained structures marked Visitor Arrivals, Visitor Center / Administration, Power / Desalinization / Support, Hammond Res, and Safari Lodge. Grant could see the outline of a swimming pool, the rectangles of tennis courts, and the round squiggles that represented planting and shrubbery. Looks like a resort, all right, Ellie said. There followed detail sheets for the safari. The elevation sketches, the lodge looked dramatic, a long, low building with a series of pyramid shapes on the roof, but there was little about the other buildings in the visitor area, and the rest of the island was even more mysterious. As far as Grant could tell, it was mostly open space. A network of roads, tunnels, and outlying buildings, and a long, thin lake that appeared to be man-made with concrete dams and barriers. But for the most part, the island was divided into big, curving areas with very little development at all. Each area was marked by codes. Stroke P, stroke proc, stroke V, stroke 2A. Stroke D, stroke trice, stroke L, stroke 5, parenthesis 4A plus 1, end parenthesis, and so on. "Is there an explanation for the codes?" she said. Grant flipped the pages rapidly, but he couldn't find one. "Maybe they took it out," she said. "I am telling you," Grant said, "paranoid." He looked at the big, curving divisions separated from one another by the network of roads. There were only 6 divisions on the whole island, and each division was separated from the road by a concrete moat. Outside each moat was a fence with a little lightning sign alongside it. That mystified them until they were finally able to figure out it meant the fences were electrified. "That's odd," she said. "Electrified fences at a resort?" "Miles of them," Grant said. "Electrified fences and moats together. And usually with a road alongside them as well." "Just like a zoo," Ellie said. They went back to the topographical map and looked closely at the contour lines. The roads had been placed oddly. The main road ran north-south, right through the central hills of the island, including one section of road that seemed to be literally cut into the side of a cliff above a river. It began to look as if there had been a deliberate effort to leave these open areas as big enclosures, separated from the roads by moats and electric fences, and the roads were raised up above ground level so you could see over the fences. "You know," Ellie said, "some of these dimensions are enormous. Look at this. This concrete moat is 30 feet wide. That's like a military fortification." "So are these buildings," Grant said. He had noticed that each open division had a few buildings, usually located in out-of-the-way corners, but the buildings were all concrete, with thick walls. In side-view elevations, they looked like concrete bunkers, with small windows, like the Nazi pillboxes from old war movies. At that moment, they heard a muffled explosion, and Grant put the papers aside. "Back to work," he said. "Fire!" There was a slight vibration, and then yellow contour lines traced across the computer screen. This time the resolution was perfect, and Alan Grant had a glimpse of the skeleton, beautifully defined, the long neck arched back. It was unquestionably an infant velociraptor, and it looked in perfect... The screen went blank. "I hate computers," Grant said, squinting in the sun. "What happened now?" "Lost the integrator input," one of the kids said. "Just a minute." The kid bent to look at the tangle of wires going into the back of the battery-powered portable computer. They had set the computer up on a beer carton on top of Hill 4, not far from the device they called Thumper. Grant sat down on the side of the hill and looked at his watch. He said to Ellie, "We're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way." One of the kids overheard. "Ah, Alan." "Look," Grant said, "I've got a plane to catch, and I want the fossil protected before I go." Once you began to expose a fossil, you had to continue, or risk losing it. Visitors imagined the landscape of the Badlands to be unchanging, but in fact it was continuously eroding, literally right before your eyes. All day long you could hear the clatter of pebbles rolling down the crumbling hillside, and there was always a risk of a rainstorm. Even a brief shower would wash away a delicate fossil. Thus, Grant's partially exposed skeleton was at risk, and it had to be protected until he returned. Fossil protection ordinarily consisted of a tarp over the site and a trench around the perimeter to control water runoff. The question was how large a trench the velociraptor fossil required. To decide that, they were using computer-assisted sonic tomography, or CAST, C-A-S-T. This was a new procedure in which Thumper fired a soft lead slug into the ground, setting up shock waves that were read by the computer and assembled into a kind of X-ray image of the hillside. They had been using it all summer with varying results. Thumper was 20 feet away now, a big silver box on wheels with an umbrella on top. It looked like an ice cream vendor's pushcart, parked incongruously on the Badlands. Thumper had 2 youthful attendants loading the next soft lead pellet. So far, the cast program merely located the extent of finds, helping Grant's team to dig more efficiently, but the kids claimed that within a few years, it would be possible to generate an image so detailed that excavation would be redundant. You could get a perfect image of the bones in 3 dimensions, and it promised a whole new era of archaeology without excavation. But none of that had happened yet, and the equipment that worked flawlessly in the university laboratory proved pitifully delicate and fickle in the field. "How much longer?" Grant said. "We got it now, Alan. It's not bad." Grant went to look at the computer screen. He saw the complete skeleton traced in bright yellow. It was indeed a young specimen. The outstanding characteristic of Velociraptor, the single-toed claw, which in a full-grown animal was a curved 6-inch-long weapon capable of ripping open its prey, was in this infant no larger than the thorn on a rosebush. It was hardly visible at all on the screen. And Velociraptor was a lightly built dinosaur in any case, an animal as fine-boned as a bird, and presumably as intelligent. Here the skeleton appeared in perfect order, except that the head and neck were bent back toward the posterior. Such neck flexion was so common in fossils that some scientists had formulated a theory to explain it, suggesting that the dinosaurs had become extinct because they had been poisoned by the evolving alkaloids in plants. The twisted neck was thought to signify the death agony of the dinosaurs. Grant had finally put that one to rest by demonstrating that many species of birds and reptiles underwent a post-mortem contraction of posterior neck ligaments, which bent the head backward in a characteristic way. It had nothing to do with the cause of death. It had to do with the way a carcass dried in the sun. Grant saw that this particular skeleton had also been twisted laterally, so that the right leg and foot were raised up above the backbone. "It looks kind of distorted," one of the kids said, "but I don't think it's the computer." "No," Grant said, "it's just time. Lots and lots of time." Grant knew that people could not imagine geological time. Human life was lived on another scale of time entirely. An apple turned brown in a few minutes. Silverware turned black in a few days. A compost heap decayed in a season. A child grew up in a decade. None of these everyday human experiences prepared people to be able to imagine the meaning of 80 million years, the length of time that had passed since this little animal had died. In the classroom, Grant had tried different comparisons. If you imagined the human lifespan of 60 years was compressed to a day, then 80 million years would still be 3,652 years, older than the pyramids. The Velociraptor had been dead a long time. "Doesn't look very fearsome," one of the kids said. "He wasn't," Grant said. "At least, not until he grew up." Probably this baby had scavenged, feeding off carcasses slain by the adults after the big animals had gorged themselves, and lay basking in the sun. Carnivores could eat as much as 25% of their body weight in a single meal, and it made them sleepy afterward. The babies would chitter and scramble over the indulgent, somnolent bodies of the adults and nip little bites from the dead animal. The babies were probably cute little animals. But an adult Velociraptor was another matter entirely. Pound for pound, a Velociraptor was the most rapacious dinosaur that ever lived. Although relatively small, about 200 pounds, the size of a leopard, Velociraptors were quick, intelligent, and vicious, able to attack with sharp jaws, powerful clawed forearms, and the devastating single claw on the foot. Velociraptors hunted in packs, and Grant thought it must have been a sight to see a dozen of these animals racing at full speed, leaping onto the back of a much larger dinosaur, tearing at the neck and slashing at the ribs and belly. "We're running out of time," Ellie said, bringing him back. Grant gave instructions for the trench. From the computer image, they knew the skeleton lay in a relatively confined area. A ditch around a 2-meter square would be sufficient. Meanwhile, Ellie lashed down the tarp that covered the side of the hill. Grant helped her pound in the final stakes. "How did the baby die?" one of the kids asked. "I doubt we'll know," Grant replied. Infant mortality in the wild is high. In African parks it runs 70% among some carnivores. It could have been anything. Disease, separation from the group, anything. Or even attack by an adult. We know these animals hunted in packs, but we don't know anything about their social behavior in a group. The students nodded. They had all studied animal behavior, and they knew, for example, that when a new male took over a lion pride, the first thing he did was kill all the cubs. The reason was apparently genetic. The male had evolved to disseminate his genes as widely as possible, and by killing the cubs, he brought all the females into heat so that he could impregnate them. It also prevented the females from wasting their time nurturing the offspring of another male. Perhaps the velociraptor hunting pack was also ruled by a dominant male. They knew so little about dinosaurs, Grant thought. After 150 years of research and excavation all around the world, they still knew almost nothing about what the dinosaurs had really been like. "We've got to go," Alice said, "if we're going to get the show to Y5. Hammond. Gennaro's secretary bustled in with a new suitcase. It still had the sales tags on it. "You know, Mr. Gennaro," she said severely, "when you forget to pack, it makes me think you don't really want to go on this trip." "Maybe you're right," Gennaro said. "I'm missing my kid's birthday." Saturday was Amanda's birthday, and Elizabeth had invited 20 screaming 4-year-olds to share it, as well as Cappy the clown and a magician. His wife hadn't been happy to hear that Gennaro was going out of town. Neither had Amanda. "Well, I did the best I could on short notice," his secretary said. "There's running shoes your size, and khaki shorts and shirts, and a shaving kit. A pair of jeans and a sweatshirt if it gets cold. The car is downstairs to take you to the airport. You have to leave now to make the flight." She left. Gennaro walked down the hallway tearing the sales tags off the suitcase. As he passed the all-glass conference room, Dan Ross left the table and came outside. "Have a good trip," Ross said, "but let's be very clear about one thing. I don't know how bad this situation actually is, Donald, but if there's a problem on that island, burn it to the ground." "Jesus, Dan, we're talking about a big investment." "Don't hesitate. Don't think about it. Just do it. Hear me?" Gennaro nodded. "I hear you," he said, "but Hammond—" "Screw Hammond," Ross said. My boy," the familiar raspy voice said. "How have you been, my boy?" "Very well, sir," Gennaro replied. He leaned back in the padded leather chair of the Gulfstream II jet as it flew east toward the Rocky Mountains. "You never call me any more," Hammond said reproachfully. "I've missed you, Donald. How is your lovely wife?" "She's fine. Elizabeth's fine. We have a little girl now." "Wonderful, wonderful. Children are such a delight. She'd get a kick out of our new park in Costa Rica." Gennaro had forgotten how short Hammond was. As he sat in the chair, his feet didn't touch the carpeting. He swung his legs as he talked. There was a childlike quality to the man, even though Hammond must now be, 75, 76, something like that. He looked older than Gennaro remembered, but then Gennaro hadn't seen him for almost 5 years. Hammond was flamboyant, a born showman. And back in 1983, he had an elephant that he carried around with him in a little cage. The elephant was 9 inches high and a foot long and perfectly formed, except his tusks were stunted. Hammond took the elephant with him to fundraising meetings. Gennaro usually carried it into the room, the cage covered with a little blanket like a tea cozy, and Hammond would give his usual speech about the prospects for developing what he called consumer biologicals. Then, at the dramatic moment, Hammond would whip away the blanket to reveal the elephant, and he would ask for money. The elephant was always a rousing success. Its tiny body, hardly bigger than a cat's, promised untold wonders to come from the laboratory of Norman Atherton, the Stanford geneticist who was Hammond's partner in the new venture. But as Hammond talked about the elephant, he left a great deal unsaid. For example, Hammond was starting a genetics company, but the tiny elephant hadn't been made by any genetic procedure. Atherton had simply taken a dwarf elephant embryo and raised it in an artificial womb with hormonal modifications. That in itself was quite an achievement, but nothing like what Hammond hinted had been done.
I'd just like to take a moment to basically comment on all of that, basically what we just heard from the Jurassic Park audiobook. It's so ironic because I remember back when Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom had come out, and so many people were being unfair to the movie, basically saying that they made stuff up, and how I basically came in to defend the merits of the film, saying that it actually took a lot of inspiration from the novel. One of the things that they criticized the most was the introduction of Norman Atherton, the introduction of Benjamin Lockwood, who they basically said that was just pretty much just a carbon copy of John Hammond, or a John Hammond stand-in that they had to resort to using because Richard Attenborough had died. That's ultimately what I feared the character was going to be. In fact, I actually feared that Benjamin Lockwood was going to end up being the actual novel counterpart of John Hammond, who is, well, let's just say he's far different than Richard Attenborough's performance in the iconic Jurassic Park movie, and there's a reason for that, so... But anyways, I was actually kind of relieved when, in reality, Benjamin Lockwood was actually a character who was meant to be a reference to one of the long-lost characters from the novel that was finally brought into the movie canon. Effectively, Benjamin Lockwood is pretty much a in-movie universe canon counterpart of Norman Atherton. I don't know why they couldn't just name him Northern Atherton, but who knows at this point. I mean, with Dr. Michael Crichton dead for more than 10 years at this point, and I assume that most of his works are now in the control of the Crichton estate, I have a feeling that they probably can't go back to the original Jurassic Park novel to use these potentially copyrighted characters. They can reference the novel all they want, but I don't think that they can actually use the name. And it's so ironic because basically, I had a bit of a revelation, something that reminded me of why I'm so vehemently fighting against people who dislike the movie for unfair reasons. People are asking, why can't you just let people have their opinions? Well, mostly because their opinions are built upon misinformation, and this is pretty much the greatest example of that, because I got reminded of the sheer arrogance and stupidity that I had to deal with when first encountering people who disliked the movie. Basically speaking, when I mentioned Norman Atherton to these people who were claiming that Benjamin Lockwood was just a non-important character that they just poofed out of nowhere into existence, I basically mentioned that Norman in the book was Hammond's business partner, and that he'd actually genetically engineered a dwarf miniaturized elephant for John Hammond to use during his pitch in order to collect capital for Jurassic Park. And I got into an argument with this guy who I'm fairly certain was a troll, but he just arrogantly claimed that Hammond never had a dwarf elephant. That's something that I made up, and so I literally basically posted him the quote from the novel that talks about the dwarf elephant. So it's basically yeah, don't you dare be calling me a liar, because I know this stuff. Do not go head to head with me. You are going to lose. So what I'm basically saying is that, yeah, the movie does have its flaws, but at the same time, I can't help but recognize that it is probably one of the smartest entries in the Jurassic Park franchise yet, and that's why people hate it, because they're intimidated by how intelligent this movie was. And then other people are just complaining about things that, literally speaking, are just the dumbest tripe. I remember seeing another guy's video just a short while ago complaining once again about Isla Nublar's volcano, and I made an entire video talking about how criticisms against Isla Nublar having a volcano are completely invalid because the volcano has always been there. So, yeah, basically when it comes down to it, it's one thing to let people have their opinions, but when their opinions are formed on misinformation, then it's not really their opinion that they're spreading, it's their stupidity. And regardless of whether or not their opinion is their own, if I actually can show that I am right, your right to be wrong does not override my right to be right and to correct you. So, basically speaking, if you're coming at me with false information, I'm going to basically call you out on it, and I'm going to basically show you why you are wrong, where you are wrong, and I'm going to expect you to completely deny it and ignore me, because that's what losers end up doing when they are backed into a corner and they want and they basically want to save face to avoid being embarrassed. So yeah, basically speaking, come at me. I will basically be able to combat you at anything you basically might have to say about the merits or lack thereof of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom.
Also, Atherton hadn't been able to duplicate his miniature elephant, and he'd tried. For one thing, everybody who saw the elephant wanted one. Then, too, the elephant was prone to colds, particularly during winter. The sneezes coming through the little trunk filled Hammond with dread. And sometimes the elephant would get his tusks stuck between the bars of the cage and snort irritably as he tried to get free. Sometimes he got infections around the tusk line. Hammond always fretted that his elephant would die before Atherton could grow a replacement. Hammond also concealed from prospective investors the fact that the elephant's behavior had changed substantially in the process of miniaturization. The little creature might look like an elephant, but he acted like a vicious rodent, quick-moving and mean-tempered. Hammond discouraged people from petting the elephant to avoid nipped fingers. And although Hammond spoke confidently of $7 billion in annual revenues by 1993, his project was intensely speculative. Hammond had vision and enthusiasm, but there was no certainty that his plan would work at all, particularly since Norman Atherton, the brains behind the project, had terminal cancer, which was a final point Hammond neglected to mention. Even so, with Gennaro's help, Hammond got his money. Between September of 1983 and November of 1985, John Alfred Hammond and his pachyderm portfolio raised $870 million in venture capital to finance his proposed corporation, International Genetic Technologies Incorporated. And they could have raised more, except Hammond insisted on absolute secrecy, and he offered no return on capital for at least 5 years. That scared a lot of investors off. In the end, they'd had to take mostly Japanese consortia. The Japanese were the only investors who had the patience. Sitting in the leather chair of the jet, Gennaro thought about how evasive Hammond was. The old man was now ignoring the fact that Gennaro's law firm had forced this trip on him. Instead, Hammond behaved as if they were engaged in a purely social outing. "It's too bad you didn't bring your family with you, Donald," he said. Gennaro shrugged. "It's my daughter's birthday. 20 kids already scheduled. The cake and the clown. You know how it is." "Oh, I understand," Hammond said. "Kids set their hearts on things." "Anyway, is the park ready for visitors?" Gennaro asked. "Well, not officially," Hammond said. "But the hotel is built, so there is a place to stay." "And the animals?" "Of course, the animals are all there, all in their spaces." Gennaro said, "I remember in the original proposal you were hoping for a total of 12... "Oh, we're far beyond that. We have 238 animals, Donald." 238? The old man giggled, pleased at Gennaro's reaction. "You can't imagine it. We have herds of them." 238? How many species? 15 different species, Donald. "That's incredible," Gennaro said. "That's fantastic. And what about all the other things you wanted, the facilities, the computers?" All of it, Hammond said. "Everything on that island is state-of-the-art. You'll see for yourself, Donald. It's perfectly wonderful. That's why this concern is so misplaced. There's absolutely no problem with the island." Gennaro said, "Then there should be absolutely no problem with an inspection." "And there isn't," Hammond said, "but it slows things down. Everything has to stop for the official visit." You've had delays anyway. You've postponed the opening. Oh, that. Hammond tugged at the red silk handkerchief in the breast pocket of his sport coat. It was bound to happen. Bound to happen. Why? Gennaro asked. Well, Donald, Hammond said, to explain that, you have to go back to the initial concept of the resort. The concept of the most advanced amusement park in the world, combining the latest electronic and biological technologies. I'm not talking about rides. Everybody has rides. Coney Island has rides. And these days, everybody has animatronic environments. The haunted house, the pirate den, the Wild West, the earthquake. Everyone has those things. So we set out to make biological attractions, living attractions. Attractions so astonishing they would capture the imagination of the entire world. Gennaro had to smile. It was almost the same speech, word for word, that he had used on the investors so many years ago. And we can never forget the ultimate object of the project in Costa Rica, to make money, Hammond said, staring out the windows of the jet. Lots and lots of money. I remember, Gennaro said. And the secret to making money in a park, Hammond said, is to limit your personnel costs. The food handlers, ticket takers, cleanup crews, repair teams. To make a park that runs with minimal staff. That was why we invested in all the computer technology. We automated wherever we could. I remember. But the plain fact is, Hammond said, when you put together all the animals and all the computer systems, you run into snags. Who ever got a major computer system up and running on schedule? Nobody I know. So you've just had normal startup delays? Yes, that's right, Hammond said. Normal delays. I heard there were accidents during construction, Gennaro said. Some workmen died. Yes, there were several accidents, Hammond said, and a total of 3 deaths. 2 workers died building the Cliff Road. One other died as a result of an earth mover accident in January. But we haven't had any accidents for months now. He put his hand on the younger man's arm. Donald, he said, believe me when I tell you that everything on the island is going forward as planned. Everything on that island is perfectly fine. The intercom clicked. The pilot said, Seatbelts, please. We're landing in Shoto. Shoto. Dry plains stretched away toward distant black buttes. The afternoon wind blew dust and tumbleweed across the cracked concrete. Grant stood with Ellie near the jeep and waited while the sleek Grumman jet circled for a landing. I hate to wait on the money men, Grant grumbled. Ellie shrugged. Goes with the job. Although many fields of science, such as physics and chemistry, have become federally funded, paleontology remains strongly dependent on private patrons. Quite apart from his own curiosity about the island in Costa Rica, Grant understood that if John Hammond asked for his help, he would give it. That was how patronage worked, how it had always worked. The little jet landed and rolled quickly toward them. Ellie shouldered her bag. The jet came to a stop, and a stewardess in a blue uniform opened the door. Inside, he was surprised at how cramped it was, despite the luxurious appointments. Grant had to hunch over as he went to shake Hammond's hand. Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler, Hammond said. It's good of you to join us. Allow me to introduce my associate, Donald Gennaro. Gennaro was a stocky, muscular man in his mid-30s, wearing an Armani suit and wire-frame glasses. Grant disliked him on sight. He shook hands quickly. When Ellie shook hands, Gennaro said in surprise, You're a woman. These things happen, she said, and Grant thought, she doesn't like him either. Hammond turned to Gennaro. You know, of course, what Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler do. They're paleontologists. They dig up dinosaurs. And then he began to laugh as if he found the idea very funny. Take your seats, please, the stewardess said, closing the door. Immediately, the plane began to move. You'll have to excuse us, Hammond said, but we are in a bit of a rush. Donald thinks it's important we get right down there. The pilot announced 4 hours flying time to Dallas, where they would refuel, and then go on to Costa Rica, arriving the following morning. "And how long will we be in Costa Rica?" Grant asked. "Well, that really depends," Gennaro said. "We have a few things to clear up." "Take my word for it," Hammond said, turning to Grant. "We'll be down there no more than 48 hours. Grant buckled his seatbelt. "This island of yours that we're going to, I haven't heard anything about it before. Is it some kind of secret?" "In a way," Hammond said. "We have been very, very careful about making sure nobody knows about it, until the day we finally open that island to a surprised and delighted public." Target of Opportunity. The Biosyn Corporation of Cupertino, California, had never called an emergency meeting of its board of directors. The 10 directors now sitting in the conference room were irritable and impatient. It was 8 p.m. They had been talking among themselves for the last 10 minutes, but slowly had fallen silent, shuffling papers, looking pointedly at their watches. "What are we waiting for?" one asked. "One more," Louis Dodgson said. "We need one more." He glanced at his watch. Ron Meyer's office had said he was coming up on the 6 o'clock plane from San Diego. He should be here by now, even allowing for traffic from the airport. "You need a quorum?" another director asked. "Yes," Dodgson said, "we do." That shut them up for a moment. A quorum meant that they were going to be asked to make an important decision. And God knows they were, although Dodgson would have preferred not to call a meeting at all. But Steingarten, the head of Biosyn, was adamant. "You'll have to get their agreement for this one, Lou," he had said. Depending on who you talked to, Louis Dodgson was famous as the most aggressive geneticist of his generation or the most reckless. 34, balding, hawk-faced, and intense, he had been dismissed by Johns Hopkins as a graduate student for planning gene therapy on human patients without obtaining the proper FDA protocols. Hired by Biosyn, he had conducted the controversial rabies vaccine test in Chile. Now he was the head of product development at Biosyn, which supposedly consisted of reverse engineering, taking a competitor's product, tearing it apart, learning how it worked, and then making your own version. In practice, it involved industrial espionage, much of it directed toward the InGen Corporation. In the 1980s, a few genetic engineering companies began to ask, what is the biological equivalent of a Sony Walkman? These companies weren't interested in pharmaceuticals or health. They were interested in entertainment, sports, leisure activities, cosmetics, and pets. The perceived demand for consumer biologicals in the 1990s was high. InGen and Biosyn were both at work in this field. Biosyn had already achieved some success, engineering a new pale trout. This trout was easier to spot in streams and was said to represent a step forward in angling. At least it eliminated complaints to the Fish and Game Department that there were no trout in the streams. The fact that the pale trout sometimes died of sunburn, and that its flesh was soggy and tasteless, was not discussed. Biosyn was still working on that, and the door opened, and Ron Meyer entered the room, slipped into a seat. Dodgson now had his quorum. He immediately stood. "Gentlemen," he said, "we're here tonight to consider a target of opportunity, InGen." Dodgson quickly reviewed the background. InGen's startup in 1983 with Japanese investors, the purchase of 3 Cray XMP supercomputers, the purchase of Isla Nublar in Costa Rica, the stockpiling of amber, the unusual donations to zoos around the world, from the New York Zoological Society to the Ranthambore Wildlife Park in India. "Despite all these clues," Dodgson said, "we still had no idea where InGen might be going. The company seemed obviously focused on animals, and they had hired researchers with an interest in the past, paleobiologists, DNA phylogeneticists, and so on. Then in 1987, InGen bought an obscure company called Millipore Plastic Products in Nashville, Tennessee. This was an agribusiness company that had recently patented a new plastic with the characteristics of an avian eggshell. This plastic could be shaped into an egg and used to grow chick embryos. Starting the following year, InGen took the entire output of this Millipore plastic for its own use. Dr. Dodgson, this is all very interesting. At the same time, Dodgson continued, construction was begun on Isla Nublar. This involved massive earthworks, including a shallow lake 2 miles long in the center of the island. Plans for resort facilities were let out with a high degree of confidentiality. But it appears that InGen has built a private zoo of large dimensions on the island. One of the directors leaned forward and said, Dr. Dodgson, so what? It's not an ordinary zoo, Dodgson said. This zoo is unique in the world. It seems that InGen has done something quite extraordinary. They have managed to clone extinct animals from the past. What animals? Animals that hatch from eggs, and that require a lot of room in a zoo. What animals? Dinosaurs, Dodgson said. They are cloning dinosaurs. The consternation that followed was entirely misplaced, in Dodgson's view. The trouble with money men was that they didn't keep up. They had invested in a field, but they didn't know what was possible. In fact, there had been discussion of cloning dinosaurs in the technical literature as far back as 1982. With each passing year, the manipulation of DNA had grown easier. Genetic material had already been extracted from Egyptian mummies, and from the hide of a quagga, a zebra-like African animal that had become extinct in the 1880s. By 1985, it seemed possible that quagga DNA might be reconstituted, and a new animal grown. If so, it would be the first creature brought back from extinction solely by reconstruction of its DNA. If that was possible, what else was also possible? The mastodon? The saber-toothed tiger? The dodo? Or even a dinosaur? Of course, no dinosaur DNA was known to exist anywhere in the world, but by grinding up large quantities of dinosaur bones, it might be possible to extract fragments of DNA. Formerly, it was thought that fossilization eliminated all DNA. Now, that was recognized as untrue. If enough DNA fragments were recovered, it might be possible to clone a living animal. Back in 1982, the technical problems had seemed daunting, but there was no theoretical barrier. It was merely difficult, expensive, and unlikely to work, yet it was certainly possible, if anyone cared to try. InGen had apparently decided to try. What they have done, Dodgson said, is build the greatest single tourist attraction in the history of the world. As you know, zoos are extremely popular. Last year, more Americans visited zoos than all professional baseball and football games combined. And the Japanese love zoos. There are 50 zoos in Japan and more being built. And for this zoo, InGen can charge whatever they want, $2,000 a day, $10,000 a day. And then there is the merchandising, the picture books, T-shirts, video games, caps, stuffed toys, comic books, and pets. Pets? Of course. If InGen can make life-size dinosaurs, they can also make pygmy dinosaurs as household pets. What child won't want a little dinosaur as a pet, a little patented animal for their very own? InGen will sell millions of them. And InGen will engineer them so that these pet dinosaurs can only eat InGen pet food. Jesus, somebody said. Exactly, Dodgson said. The zoo is the centerpiece of an enormous enterprise. You said these dinosaurs will be patented? Yes. Genetically engineered animals can now be patented. The Supreme Court ruled on that in favor of Harvard in 1987. InGen will own its dinosaurs, and no one else can legally make them. Well, what prevents us from creating our own dinosaurs? Someone said. Nothing, except that they have a 5-year start. It'll be almost impossible to catch up before the end of the century. He paused. Of course, if we could obtain examples of their dinosaurs, we could reverse engineer them and make our own, with enough modifications in the DNA to evade their patents. Can we obtain examples of their dinosaurs? Dodgson paused. I believe we can, yes. Somebody cleared his throat. There wouldn't be anything illegal about it. Oh, no, Dodgson said quickly. Nothing illegal. I'm talking about a legitimate source of their DNA, a disgruntled employee or some trash improperly disposed of, something like that. Do you have a legitimate source, Dr. Dodgson? I do, Dodgson said. But I'm afraid there is some urgency to the decision because InGen is experiencing a small crisis, and my source will have to act within the next 24 hours. A long silence descended over the room. The men looked at the secretary, taking notes, and the tape recorder on the table in front of her. I don't see the need for a formal resolution on this, Dodgson said. Just a sense of the room as to whether you feel I should proceed. Slowly the heads nodded. Nobody spoke. Nobody went on record. They just nodded silently. Thank you for coming, gentlemen, Dodgson said. I'll take it from here.
Well, I feel like that's a pretty good place to stop for now. I'm pretty sure that this is basically right on the edge of the third iteration. For those of you who don't know, the chapters in Jurassic Park are not exactly labeled. Each one just basically has like a subheading, like a section. Kind of like, I think that basically since according to the novel, the entire narrative is basically meant to be recanted as kind of an investigation of some sort of incident. So each chapter, every single chapter is basically divided up into groups and sections of the book that are referred to as iterations, with a little bit of narration from Dr. Malcolm about what each iteration means. So I'd say that it's a pretty clever way of like tying everything back together. So anyways, we basically saw that I basically had finally completed that section of fence and went back and added in the lights and alarm systems. I basically had a thought to myself that basically it's kind of pointless to add the little alarm thing under every single light on the fence towers as much as it is kind of pointless to add a light on every single fence post, but I don't know, at the same time it just sort of looks incomplete without them, and I've already gone over so much of the island already putting them all in that it would feel wrong to basically like leave them off, and I can't simply just go back and take them away again. So anyways, let me see here. This was the original progress indicator from more than a year ago. Hard to believe that that small circle there, that tiny little circle on the map, encompassed so much area of park that I honestly thought that so much more of the park had been fenced in by now, that I actually had a working and liable fence. But now, basically the second iteration, which I'll eventually draw in, expanded to this territory right here. The third one expanded all the way there, and very soon I will have one that expands all the way to the Tor Road there. Yep. Basically speaking, if my calculations are correct, this right here is where we should be, where we have left off. Exactly where we should be. Unless there's another map, unless there's another road that cuts through. Oh, damn. Well, this is embarrassing. Give me one moment, ladies and gentlemen. Oy vey. Have I mentioned that it's tough being me? This is technically the more accurate map, but it's the one that I don't really use because of how blurry it is. But, as you can see, there actually is a road that is meant to cut through this area of fence, but it's actually supposed to be in a tunnel. So, potentially speaking, we could be either there, which I find unlikely, or we could be here, which could be just as easily unlikely. I just don't know. Every single time I think that I've actually started making even more progress on this project, something else comes along that just completely ruins my expectations, just completely destroys whatever hopes and dreams I might have had. Oh well. So as long as that winding section of fence there has been properly filled in, now I can start focusing on the more straightforward sections of fencing, and I should think that if I don't lose interest in playing Minecraft and listening to Jurassic Park to put up videos on YouTube for you guys, I could basically have the Tyrannosaurus pen completely fenced in and finished, maybe without the Tor Road fence, within the next few months. Because, well, let's face it, I'm gonna start being busy once the semester starts again, and, well, quite frankly, I just, I don't really think that I'll be able to have much time to just be laying the foundation for the fences and whatnot. So, anyways, we could go back to the game real quick just to get basically a clear indication of where exactly it is that I currently am. Let me see here. End of goal point 2. We're gonna have to... Actually, no, we don't have to. That's what we have waypoints for. And I'm stuck. It's tough being me. Crap. Yeah, you gonna try and shoot me now? Huh? Let's just follow the road. And considering how much the road is going up over this steep incline, I'm almost positive that this is where the tunnel is supposed to be. Not looking forward to actually building that. And if I actually know this island as well as I think I do, we should be coming to a clearing where the road mysteriously stops. Yeah, basically speaking, I'm gonna have to, like, just dig a tunnel straight through this, because that's ridiculous right there. Expecting the car to go over that, it's just a ludicrous idea. Riveting gameplay. Really great commentary to keep everything lively and fun and interesting, isn't it? Yep, and here's the clearing. And this is where the road mysteriously disappears. Gonna cross-reference it with the map again. Let me see here. If that is the tunnel, then it's an incredibly long tunnel. Maybe I ought to bust open World Painter and take a look again. So many fences, so little time, and so few resources. Absolutely nobody to help me with this project. Truth be told, I actually think that I might legitimately die before this island is ever finished. I'm pretty sure that that yellow or amber colored R that we're moving to is meant to be the Rex pen, so let's keep moving towards it. And we've basically followed in a straight line, so I'm guessing that this is another section of fencing that I'm going to have to put in. Hoy. Yep. This is Rexy's road attack. An incredible drop-off. Steep enough for a certain tour vehicle to fall all the way down there. But look over here. Solid earth. And this is basically the fence that runs along the tour road. Almost enough space for a certain large animal to stand completely comfortably, biting down pieces of an unelectrified fence and stepping over. And the fences in this section over here, because there's no longer the taut tension from these broken pieces over here, would eventually cause the section of fence over here to begin to sag, creating a second opening in the fence that the Rex would inevitably push one of the tour vehicles into. Almost like it's not a plot hole at all. It's just people don't think. They only see the problem and want to talk about the impossibility of it instead of looking for the obvious solution, which would only take roughly, I'd think, maybe 5 minutes of actual deductive reasoning, like trying to figure out how a guy as white as Jeff Goldblum could possibly have a black daughter. Anyway, this is basically where another tunnel is supposed to be. Yeah, if you can't tell, even though we're making progress, it's not really much in terms of progress. We've still got a long way to go. It's going to be tough, it's going to be heartbreaking, it's going to be annoying, but I've got to do it because I set out to start this thing, and by God, I am going to finish it. Even if it kills me. Especially if it kills me. You think I'm afraid to die? No. So incredible how easy it is to get turned around, because I could have sworn that there was supposed to be over there. Well, anyways, we've been going on for more than an hour, almost an hour and 20 minutes, actually. And so I basically accomplished what I set out to do for this video at least. And I think I'd much rather take a break, maybe watch some movies. In fact, yeah, this is the tour road for Rexy, and it leads right over to the Blue E. That's basically where we stopped off for this episode. So yeah, that was halfway through. Darn it. Oh well. These two gaps right here are only about 600 blocks wide or so they're considerably shorter than that last section of fence. That is the only thing that keeps me sane, because as long as I basically just go about doing it, not really focusing on doing it completely as mindlessly as I possibly can, then everything should turn out fine. I think that I might end up paving these roads, because even though I like the fact that they're dirt that doesn't get grown over with the grass and whatnot, I still think that they're uneven, that the terrain is just too uneven to actually be, well, competently driven across. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hope you guys are enjoying my Jurassic Park Minecraft video series. hope that you guys will continue to support me, because even just one comment telling me to please continue this franchise, please continue this video series, please continue building this awesome Jurassic Park Minecraft world, despite the fact that dozens of other YouTubers have already done theirs and they have a great head start on me. It keeps me going. It gives me the confidence that I need that someone is actually willing to take a look at all my hard work and labor and actually wants to see this project completed to the end as much as I do. So, thank you, and I continue to ask for your support. Hope you guys have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next video. Later.